I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up into
Now in noon, day 3.
that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear the thoughts build up until
Now in
I
noon, day
can't
3.
hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hey guys, welcome to True Crime Rocket Science. This is day 3 of the Delphi trial. It's day 2 of the Sarah Boone case, and looks like she might be testifying at some point. I don't think the defense is up just yet. But before we get to the testimony of today and some of that information that came out, something that I've thought about a few times is, it's very hard given the angle. When you look at the figure on screen, let's just put it up full screen. Hi, Pauline, Brianna, Flora, Dabia, Earth, Tanny. Tanny, thanks a lot for that. Thank you. Plant Lady, Chelsea, thank you very much. Welcome. So I just want to, before I forget, mention something. Because of the angle, that sort of cut off perspective, it's very hard to get a sense of the size of the man that we're dealing with, because you don't see the other side of the bridge. You only see one side of it. And so I think it does actually give you a misleading sense of the size of this person. And so what I would do if I was the prosecutor, I suppose you could also do it if you were the defense and hope you have a O.J. Simpson moment. But what I would do is I would have the defendant dress up in these clothes and have him walk across the bridge, or a simulated version of the bridge. So you could put a couple of planks next to one another, but have the same kind of perspective, and then see whether the person is proportionately the same size. Now, if you think about it, you could also use science. You could use, because you've got the exact perspective over there, you could use science to determine the exact height and dimensions of the man that you're looking at. So why don't they do that? I mean, that is a great way to establish one way or the other if Richard Allen is the suspect, because he is a unusually diminutive guy. And so, if the evidence is going to show that it's someone who's of different proportions, well, that would be the evidence. But it could just as well prove that Richard Allen is the man, right? But it's not about whether he's lost weight, it's about height. That's the critical feature here. That's the critical issue here. I'm just saying, one of the reasons it's hard to tell how big this guy is because you don't have the width of the bridge to gauge perspective in a way that would otherwise be helpful, if that makes sense. Don't you think that is something that no one's really spoken about, and I think would be quite helpful here? Okay, so we are going to now go a little bit into the evidence. I think over 40 photos were shown to the jurors today. The jurors were visibly emotional. What was Richard Allen's reaction? So we're going to deal with that. Didn't it sound like he said Ali? And I must say, I was once interviewed by Court TV, and I, instead of referring to Laurie's sister, Summer Shiflett, I think I referred to her as Sammy, so I guess it does happen. Size of a football field. I must say, I was quite surprised at the matter-of-fact manner in which this reporter is talking about this sort of thing. I've sat in court several times where you see graphic images that you would never otherwise see in your everyday life. And they really burn into your mind. I mean, I still remember very clearly sitting in court in Austin, Texas, and seeing the images of Mo Wilson. And suddenly in an instant, you get a very visceral understanding of what went on there. In the Jason Roeder case, it's a case I don't think I've ever spoken about to you guys, but same thing. You saw images of his wife lying on the floor, on the bathroom floor, and all of that really. I don't know how you can walk out of a courtroom and not be affected by that for the rest of the day, and even to some extent for the rest of your life. Same applies to the Oscar Pistorius case. Seen the autopsy pictures there as well. And I don't know, there's something very, I hate you overuse the word visceral, but there's something very disturbing, but in a very raw sense of, first of all, the youth of the victim. Secondly, this idea of one of them being naked, and then the other thing, the large amounts of blood spilled on the earth. There's something just very raw to that whole image. And although we may have thought about this case and discussed the case, this just, and that's why I've made it the title to this video, the ground nearby was saturated with blood, just kind of gives you a sense of someone, a person, in this case almost a child, but a young lady, reduced to sort of flesh and bones, a person that is now reduced to even less than an object. The other thing that came out in today's evidence that was for me quite surprising was the fact that Abby's clothing was damp or wet, which suggests something that I thought when I first heard that she'd been clothed in Libby's clothing, that it was taken off, washed, and then put on her again, which I think explains why there's this lack of DNA. Thanks a lot, Manifesto. It's good to see you here. Thanks a lot. So now you're going to hear a description of what this journalist saw and what the condition that Libby was in. Before he describes it, I must say this part kind of caught me by surprise, because up until now I've been definitely quite dismissive of the whole branches in configurations thing. And I actually thought this journalist was going to say that it appeared to him kind of random. Now, I don't know whether the fact that he's heard it before is influencing him. It's very hard to say because I can't see the images myself. But it seems like, anyway, let's hear what he says.
Abby is clothed, we've been told. You could.
That is definitely quite a big insight, the fact that the clothes Abby was wearing were Libby's clothes and they were damp and wet. So, I think when you, how can I put it, when you're dealing with any crime scene and you're saying, well, there's no DNA evidence, I think when there's evidence of a cover-up, evidence of staging, evidence of trying to get rid of evidence, then you would expect, so if someone has the time to clean up a crime scene, then you would expect it to be a I don't want to say suboptimal, but you would expect there to be a substantially less amount of evidence than you would expect to be there. And so I think as soon as you in a crime scene and you're saying, wow, we can't find any evidence, and then if there is evidence of there being a cover-up and staging, washing, changing, all that kind of thing, then you've got to anticipate that you're not going to get as much evidence as you want. I think it's very different to come into a thing and say, well, there was no evidence to convict the person, blah, blah. Well, are we talking about no evidence? Or are we talking about there is evidence, but it's been destroyed? That's a totally different story. And what's very interesting in, for example, the Madeleine McCann case, I don't think you can say there's no evidence of X, Y, Z. You can say the evidence doesn't meet a particular standard, it's not of a high enough, especially in terms of the DNA evidence, the evidence doesn't quite reach that point where you can say it absolutely is evidence of X, Y, Z. And the lack of evidence is not the same as the absence of evidence. The same applies to the Amanda Knox case. They found DNA, but they weren't able to absolutely link the DNA. Amount of evidence that doesn't quite meet a certain level isn't an absence of evidence, it's the evidence not being quite sufficient to reach a certain point, which is totally different. Now, in the same way, in this case, you might say, well, there's no DNA evidence, but there's one area that I think is very potentially strong evidence, and it's a critical part that this case hinges on in a way, and that is the girls made a recording of certain words and certain statements and a little bit of video, right, of bridge guy saying down the hill, but also bridge guy walking. But there was also another word that he said, and some people think it was one of the girls saying gun, right? And I think they're discussing whether to allow that in or out. But if you think about that, them saying gun and then a bullet casing was found at the scene, and how else would the perpetrator have convinced the girls to do what he was saying if he didn't have a gun? If he had a knife, it would be much harder to, at a distance, get them to sort of remote control them. Does that make sense? So yeah, definitely is interesting, the fact that the clothing was wet. So I have to say that definitely surprised me. Hearing that definitely surprised me. And it's not the first time I've come across a case where there seems to be some kind of symbolic pattern in terms of killing someone. You could even describe it in a way as a ritualistic aspect. I think you had something very similar in the West Memphis 3 case, which I've written a book about. My personal opinion here is that the perpetrator in this case did the symbolic thing. Again, I might look at the evidence and say, that doesn't look like patterns to me, but I can't say that I've got to rely on his testimony and the accuracy of what he's seeing and what he's saying. But let's assume for all intents and purposes, what his perception is reasonable. Then my assumption is that the perpetrator in this case is trying to make it look like something that it's not. In other words, he's trying to stage the crime scene to make it look like a kind of a ritualistic thing, which would then implicate somebody else. In the Amanda Knox case, the victim is staged to look like there was some kind of sexual attack on her, and there wasn't. So there's a kind of staging to imply, in my opinion, some other perpetrator, right? You have the same thing in the John Benet Ramsey case, where the ransom note implies someone other than the person who committed the crime, in my opinion. And so in this case, I wouldn't be surprised if the perpetrator is trying to make it look like some kind of organized thing, which maybe he was aware of. And the fact that the defense actually came up with the Odinism thing, I wouldn't be surprised if that came from, well, either the police investigators or from Richard Allen himself, where he said, maybe it's that. And they said, well, it does look like that. But is that what is really going on here? You might say, well, I think you're going a bit off track here. I think you're being a bit too imaginative in your speculation. Well, the fact that one of the girls was dressed in the other girl's clothing already seems to show that staging is taking place, and also even possibly disguising the actual crime. That the crime, if someone is wearing clothing, aren't they trying to pretend that something didn't happen to that particular victim? I am actually surprised that so much effort went into staging the crime with the branches, because one would think if the crime was interrupted by a phone call, Libby's phone ringing at 15:11. I don't know if it actually rang, but certainly her father called her. Then you would think there wouldn't be a lot of time to pose branches and things like that. So it definitely is adding a level of mystery to this case, isn't it? Another aspect that I definitely find very interesting, and that is Richard Allen's reaction to seeing these images. Now, we've heard that the jury were very emotional, that the gallery, people in the gallery were very moved and uncomfortable by what they were seeing. Now, let's hear how he responded.
That screen. And
So I find that really interesting. And we're going to deal with another article that provides another description of that. Now, again, I've sat in on multiple murder trials. Oscar Pistorius, Henry van Breda, the axe-murderer who killed his parents and brother, Caitlin Armstrong, and then, of course, Laurie Vallow. Now, what to me stands out here is you have Richard Allen actually looking at these images and, according to the people present, showing absolutely no emotion. Now, I remember in the Laurie Vallow case, crime scene photos were also shown of the victims in court in that case, and she didn't look at them. She didn't look at the pictures at all. And I felt like she's not looking at the pictures because it would elicit an emotion, right? That was my impression of what I was seeing. And I actually saw that as evidence of guilt. Now, in this case, you have Richard Allen looking at the pictures and apparently not showing any emotion. Again, because I wasn't in the courtroom, I can't verify where there weren't sort of micro expressions where he wasn't actually breathing under his shirt. Sometimes you can see that. But for me, when I listened to this, the fact that he was looking at the images and actually just calmly and unemotionally looking at it, that to me is quite telling. On the one hand, you could also say he's probably seen these pictures dozens of times, and that's maybe true. On the other hand, if you're on trial for murder and the victims are being shown and you are being sort of placed on trial for the murder, you would imagine that would be quite a serious moment. You could also argue that perhaps his defense lawyers have told him, do not show any reaction, right? And in other words, don't get any of the attention on you while these pictures are being shown. Still, I'm quite surprised that he actually looked at the photos. In my opinion, that is showing an amount of interest in what happened that is, I don't know. I don't know if it's biased, but I certainly think that shows, for me, it shows potentially evidence of guilt. That someone is interested in his own handiwork. In the same way that someone who is addicted to pornography, you put a picture on screen, are they going to be able to not look at it? Something like that. And I kind of get the feeling that was something that was a fantasy of his. And so when it's shown on screen, even with everybody watching, he wants to see it. It's just very hard to imagine. You might say, I don't understand your reasoning. When Laurie Vallow doesn't look at it, you think, but that was her own children, right? And I think she was feeling emotional, even if she didn't want to. In this case, I think he was feeling emotional as well. I don't know if emotion is the right word, but he was certainly feeling something when he was looking at these images. And so I don't know if you're following my line of reasoning, but I do find it interesting that almost everyone in the court seems to be emotional about what they're seeing, except him. Again, I'm making an assumption based on what I've heard. If I was in the courtroom, I might have a different interpretation.
And wearing his glasses up on top of his head. So perhaps he is...
That's a really interesting point from Pauline. Says, Juan Martinez said Jodi Arias really wanted to see the pictures of poor Travis. If you think about that, I believe that Jodi Arias also fantasized at fantasies of revenge. She'd thought about what she was going to do, and she relished what she was doing. She enjoyed what she was doing. She was after the fact happy about what she did. And even when the judge sentenced her, she kind of put in a final dig to the judge with everyone present in the court. I don't know if you guys remember that. And so one wonders whether this isn't also true of Richard Allen. I've often said when it comes to a crime, that is often the most authentic moment of the criminal, where they perhaps cowardly people, afraid, they feel invisible, and in this moment they step out of their shells and they do what they've always wanted to do. In a sense, they become who they actually are, right? And in a sense, it's their most authentic moment.
Seeing these photographs for one of only the first times, or as the prosecution claims, he is triggered.
I just want to respond to this question. Was this a crime of opportunity? I really don't think it was. I think it was a question of luring and so on. I think it was premeditated. You've got to think about the things that Richard Allen had with him. I don't know for a fact what they all were, but I do know he had a gun. I wouldn't be surprised if he had other things as well, possibly duct tape, possibly some rope or wire ties as well. I suppose that's still got to come out. But I really do believe this case was premeditated.
From you later today with more.
Okay, Diane Otto says, I agree. Him looking at the photos was him reliving the crime. Okay. Right, so that's that. We're now going to go just to this tweet from Bob Segal. Just a second. So I just want to quickly go through it. It says here, rough morning of testimony here in Delphi. I mean, even to me, can you guys see that? Just move it like that. Let me just bring up my face a little, and maybe let's do it like that. Anyway, rough morning of testimony here in Delphi. Can I just blow it up a bit? And I mean, even that is just a sign of a bit of humanity from this particular report. He's saying, wow, it was rough, it was difficult. Usually is. If you're a human being, you are going to find it unpleasant, to put it mildly. He says, an Indiana State Police crime scene investigator showed jurors 3 diagrams of the crime scene, right? So 3 illustrations and then 43 pictures, 43 photographs. You've got to wonder what it felt like for the photographer whose job it is. He can't look away. He has to sort of zoom in and get closer and pay attention and focus. The photos show Abby and Libby's bodies and their throats. He said ground nearby was saturated with blood. And then I want to go to this article. And there's the jury. Seem to be a couple of guys with beards. Anyway, not the best pictures I've ever seen. So there it is. It was an emotional day 3 of testimony. Court started shortly after 9 a.m. Some members of the general public were turned away due to limited seating. The jurors were asked a number of questions, including if anyone has spoken to them about the case. And then it took 90 minutes to show more than 40 crime scene photos. So that's around 2 minutes, if you think about it. It's around more than 2 minutes per crime scene photo. Family, jurors, and the court gallery were visibly emotional, right? And then Abby's body was just a few feet from Libby's. Abby was shown clothed, Libby was not. So I think there's a part of this article where they say a shoe was found in the river. So it also says here the jurors were putting their hands on their heads, squirming, sighing, and turning red. And again, that's just a sign that they are decent people, really. Like anyone who can look at these images and not feel upset and visibly upset, perhaps something is wrong with you. And look at that. Richard Allen looked at the photos and was taking notes. He did not show any visible emotion. I think that is quite telling as well. I think that is quite telling. I'm just trying to see. I thought there was something about during a heated cross-exam, defense attorney Brad Rosie had several questions regarding the unspent bullet. Rosie asked whether wasn't the bullet photographed more out of the ground and why there lack of photos of the bullet. Not quite sure what that's about. Just trying to see where there's a reference to a shoe. The one witness referenced the topography of the crime scene, substantial amount of blood found on Libby German. So apparently not so much blood found on Abby, which suggests that her body may have been washed and clothed, and the perpetrator may have run out of time in terms of what he was doing with Libby. It almost seems like half of the staging had been completed, something like that. Oh, there it is. I'm going to be criticized for how I pronounce that, so I'm not going to even try. In the area of Deer Creek said that he saw a multicolored shirt and a shoe in the water. What are the shirt and shoe doing in the water? Isn't the answer that they have been washed, right? Isn't that the answer? He said when he first saw the bodies of Abby and Libby, one was nude, the other was clothed. Doesn't that suggest that the perpetrator ran out of time? Okay, and then the next thing I want to share with you is just some of these images. Can you guys see that? The defense believes that the state will seek to introduce video and audio enhancements of the video recovered from Libby German's cell phone. Said video was taken on February 13. The video and audio enhancements contain words and sounds. One of the audio enhancement files received by the defense contains a phrase seemingly uttered by one of the victims, which phrase is repeated on a loop. One of the audio enhancement files received by the defense contains an audio clip of a man speaking. That's down the hill. The words allegedly spoken by the victims on the enhanced video are very difficult to understand. And so I think the defense they want to prohibit the state from eliciting testimony speculating on what the words are spoken by the girls in the enhanced audio recordings. So let me ask you, what do you think is the right determination in terms of this? The girls recorded, amongst other things, their own words, right? One of the audio enhancement files received by the defense contains a phrase seemingly uttered by one of the victims, and that phrase is repeated on a loop. So what do you think? Do you think that evidence should be allowed, or do you think that evidence should be should not be allowed? And then motivate your answer. Why should it be allowed? And if it shouldn't be allowed, why shouldn't it be allowed? So I'll give you guys a moment or two to think about that. I'll share my thoughts in a second. Let's just go to the next page. The defense requests the court prohibit the state from eliciting testimony concerning what sounds are contained in the enhanced video with the man's voice. The video and audio enhancements appear to be investigatory tools. Interpreting the words and sounds of the enhanced video requires a completely subjective analysis. So that is the defense's argument. Whoever listens to this audio is going to subjectively interpret them. And if you think about the audio at the end of the Ramsey 911 call, it is quite hard to tell what you're hearing and what someone else is saying they're hearing, right? Inigo, thanks a lot for that, says, I'm very pro law enforcement, but I'm still amazed at how almost everyone just accepts the police info by default. They're desperate to close this case. I must say, I'm quite surprised at your comment where you say they're desperate to close this case and it's 7 years later. So I've definitely been in that situation where someone says, I think I'm hearing that. And then when you listen to it from the perspective of what they're saying. And then someone else says, I think I'm hearing that, then you hear that. So there definitely is a argument for that sort of subjective interpretation. Then he says, testimony identifying the words and sounds on the video is speculative. The enhanced videos were not related to the identification of Richard Allen as a suspect. Therefore, the sketches are not relevant. Okay, and then that's that. Then I say it is up to the jury to determine what words or sounds exist on the recordings. But I think what they want is not to allow the recordings to be played and then argued over. And then there's this. Sorry, that. I think this comes from an earlier affidavit. As the male subject approaches victim 1 and 2, one of the victims mentions gun. Near the end of the video is a male is seen telling the guys down the hill. Right, now, let's have a look at some of your comments. You say the amount of time has created more pressure. I don't really agree with that argument. I mean, it's been so much time that has gone by, 7 years, and you're saying they've got pressure to close the case. And there have been so many delays and so many this, and I don't know, I just totally disagree. I don't think there's been, if anything, this case has taken a heck of a long, most cases take far quicker to come to trial and be dealt with. So Brianna says, yeah, that's how I feel about it as well. So Chelsea says allowed, Jessica says allowed, Don Spencer says not allowed due to mistrial. Don, good to see you. Sherry Wilson says the unedited original should be shown to the jury. Okay. Lena says allow. Okay, so this is my opinion. It is so rare, it is so seldom that you have something like this, that you have a little bit of video evidence, and what a treasure it is. Without this, could they have actually caught this perpetrator? And I think the argument could be made, maybe. At the same time, it is almost never happens that you actually get audio of a victim, right? It kind of almost allows the victim to speak for themselves, to speak beyond the grave. And I've actually just watched, and I know this is some people are gonna think it's silly to say this, but I've just watched an episode from The Penguin where the victim in that fictional thing, she's struck by a car and she's on the phone and she's trying to say what's happened to her and who did it, and then she passes out. And if you put yourself in the shoes of the victim wants justice. The victim wanted to live. The victim died a horrible death. The victim's voice needs to be heard, right? And so any kind of effort to say, no, it's going to be subjective or it's going to be speculative, allow the victim's voice to be heard. It's such rare, precious evidence, right? So I would say, first of all, allow the victim's voice to be heard. Secondly, explain how the police or the technology works that enhances it. And then you can have experts on both sides, the one saying, this is what we think, and then you have someone else saying, this is what we think, and then you can have the jury decide between those two experts and also decide for themselves, right? Thanks a lot, Earth. So I would definitely allow it. I personally think it's unconscionable where you have something like this. Imagine in the Murdoch case, if they disallowed that Snapchat, where you also heard the voices in the background, which actually implicated Alex Murdoch. Imagine if they disallowed that. So I would say definitely allow it. Totally absurd not to do so. Bria, it's good to see you in chat. I'll be seeing you directly in actually almost a couple of hours. Deirdre, sometimes branches thrown across the body or just branches thrown across the body. That's going to be in my opinion, but without being able to see it, it's really hard to say. I think one's got to get to know how Machiavellian is Richard Allen. Is he a kind of a sly, mischievous person? What kind of books does he read? Is he a very crafty person? Is he kind of a playful guy? Without knowing more about him, it's a little bit difficult to say one way or the other. But it does seem like, just from what we're already hearing, the luring of the girls there, the staging of the victims, redressing them in clothing and washing, makes it sound like it's quite a crafty, sly individual. And I wouldn't be surprised if that craftiness goes as far as trying to suggest the whole thing being some kind of ritual in order to push attention away from him. And maybe that is actually what he partially succeeded in doing. Who knows? How tall is he? I don't know. He definitely isn't very tall. Let's just have a look if we can get that information. He's 5'7". No, that's a goalkeeper. I think he's 5'4". I think he's 5'4". What's that in meters? That is 1.6 meters. That's really short. So yeah, he is definitely a short. That is an unusually short dude. Okay, yeah, that's right, Chelsea. Okay, and so that is it from me. That's all I really wanted to deal with, the Delphi news. And so it is going to be quite a short live stream. I've still got some work to do. Let's just have a look if there's any very recent news. Look at two separate sources. There's this one from Fox 59. Delphi murders defense seeks to prohibit testimony on audio from infamous bridge guy video. Again, I just want to reiterate, if I was on the prosecution, I would want the perpetrator, the suspect, to demo himself dressed in the same clothing, walking over either the same part of the bridge, which you probably couldn't do because it's some years later and the bridge has deteriorated, but maybe you could recreate it using kind of slats and you could kind of recreate it. But I'm sure you could use ordinary digital equipment to actually do a precise scientific measurement. So I'd be surprised if they don't do that, and I think that could be extremely compelling evidence. I just want to see where they talk about so it says here, the defense is asking the court to prohibit the state from eliciting testimony concerning the contents of the words contained in the clips. So I'm not sure if they don't want to play the clips as much as they don't want the state to elicit testimony regarding that. I also don't know whether that specifically means they don't want for the enhancements to be allowed in as evidence. I guess that will still be clarified. And then there's also this. Jurors saw more than 50 crime scene photos. Now, I think it was close to 43. Reporters inside the courtroom say many of the jurors looked disturbed after seeing the photos. Yeah. So I do think when you've sat in on numerous murder trials, you get to know the perpetrator just in terms of their mannerisms. I know Laurie Vella was always smiling, always laughing. And then when the crime scene photos were shown, then she didn't look at them. And so you kind of just get a sense of who the person is in a way. Laurie Vella a couple of times actually looked straight at me. I was like in the same line. And whereas someone like Kate and Armstrong virtually never once looked behind her, showed virtually no emotion throughout the entire thing. She was like literally like ice cold. And that was also quite impressive in a way. You know, her family sitting right behind her, just shows no emotion throughout the whole thing. Not showing any emotion when you are feeling emotional has got to be also quite difficult to pull off. Okay, I'm going to just deal with your last couple of comments. Beverly says, props in a courtroom are an asset to me. Earth says, reconstruction would be good for a jury. I've found reconstructions tremendously useful and helpful. In the Oscar Pistorius case, they literally put the door in the courtroom and the door was there like the entire time. In the Henry von Bredell case, they actually had Henry reenact the whole X thing, and it was so ridiculous the way that he apparently disarmed it was just so stupid that I don't think anyone in that entire courtroom believed. That was one of the most powerful moments where people were like, this is unbelievable. So yeah, it definitely is worthwhile. Helena says, Nick, you saw the area, right? How could one do all they did to those girls without being seen? Quite easily, because the terrain is very undulating, because he'd gone to, so let me explain the following. When you walk to the Menon High Bridge, the whole trail basically ends there. You walk to the bridge and you basically come the same way back. There are a couple of small little tangents you can take on either side. But basically, if you want to get away from everybody, you don't want to be seen, you want to get into a private part of the preserve, you would walk to the other side of the bridge, go down the bridge, cross the river, and then you would be in a completely wild, I don't want to say inaccessible, but it's not really a place anyone would go because it's not really part of the park. And so I'm sure Richard Allen knew about it and had probably, what do you call it? The perpetrator had probably reconned it beforehand. So to answer your question, yeah, it's quite easy because it's very undulating. They're very steep ravines. So with steep ravines, remember there's a river going through it. Steep ravines, heavily wooded. You just go behind a fold in a ravine, and no one's going to know you there. It's quite simple. It's very steep terrain. So and him saying down the hill also gives you an idea that you can quickly go out of sight behind a kind of a mound or whatever. That makes sense. Rob Job says, thanks for your phenomenal coverage. Thanks very much. Maria Sierra says, I didn't want to interrupt before. Deirdre says, I just don't believe the Indiana State Police pulled an innocent man out of their asses. I don't either. I must say, I'm really surprised at the people surrounding this case who think it's a conspiracy. I'm just really surprised. I guess some YouTubers have done their work. Rick says, I think the case is polluted with too many angles to convict. Okay. Okay, so I think that is it from me. Don Spencer says the weather was uncomfortable for hikers. It would have been quite cold. Remember, it was February 13th. By the way, that reminds me. Let me ask you guys a question. And this is taking the whole thing totally from the other perspective. Why do you think the girls wanted to be out there that day? What do you think was in the hearts and minds of the girls that they wanted to go out there that day? Thanks, Kathleen. Thanks, Helena. Jessica says, yeah, I mean, one of the biggest things when you're dealing with any case is, do you have an alibi or not? If someone doesn't have an alibi, well, what were you doing there by yourself? And why did you have, someone saw you with bloody clothes? And I don't know if you guys know, from one of the eyewitnesses, his clothing was wet. He was covered in mud and blood, those three things. And we know from the testimony already that he had to have gotten wet, he had to have gotten covered in blood and mud, right? And his car was parked around the corner there as well. So far, I'm not seeing what I'm looking for. So Chelsea says they had a day off and wanted to meet someone. Okay. What are we missing? Susan says, I think they were catfished. Victoria says, maybe they thought they would be meeting a boy, the boy from the chat. When you're that age, there you go. Great answer. Think about what we're dealing with. This crime happens on February 13th. What day is February 13th? Don Spencer, that's also part of it. That maybe they were going to smoke pot with this boy, right? But the big deal here is, what day does this crime happen? So many times when we deal with true crime, so many times I say the answer is time. And so the next day would have been Valentine's Day. So why is someone feeling such a strong urge to go out and meet someone, right? Well, the next day is Valentine's Day. And so you can imagine both girls would have been very susceptible to, maybe I'm going to meet my Valentine today and I'll have a Valentine tomorrow, right? Don't you agree? Don't you think that's such an important part, that this incident didn't happen on February 13? It's not just by the way, it's not a random day. It's Valentine's Day. And guess which other case also happened on the same day? The Oscar Pistorius case also happened on Valentine's Day. Right? And so that, I think, shows not only that they were lured there, but what made them so susceptible to being lured there. You can imagine being a 13, 14-year-old girl, the thrill, the fantasy, the attraction of Valentine's Day, and maybe, something's going to come out of it, right? As Chelsea says, great observation. Okay, so that's all from my side. It's quite a short crime news update today, but I think you'll agree it was quite interesting, quite compelling, and certainly we are learning things each day that this trial progresses. Young love, exactly. And it was a day of school. Yeah. Okay, thanks a lot for being here, guys. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao.